Hello, and welcome to Mondays on Tuesdays podcast. My name is Firecrow Silvernight. I will be your host. Today I'm excited to talk to you about what I believe the internet and software could have been and could be. And as I cast my imagination back to about 1996, I was making 3D graphics with a program called Raydream Designer Studio. Animations, spaceships, all kinds of fun stuff. And I remember what user experience was like back then, and a lot of people have horrible memories from what productivity software was like around that time. But for me, maybe it's because I was so creative and I was doing something for fun. I had a wonderful time with the way they laid out the options and empowered me as a user to make something that the authors of the system had never imagined. The system was a very small version of what was being used in television studios around the time for movies such as The Terminator, Jurassic Park. And so the forefront of creativity was very palpable. I'm going to talk about the basics of applications from email systems, phones, spreadsheets, office applications. But before that, I'll move on to the Compare Basic update. Compare Basic is a company that I started for more or less one reason and one reason only, which is that I got really tired of the more powerful ideas that I had taking a backseat in the companies that I worked. And so I decided that what was happening with all of the friends I have being let go, with all of the cutting and losing of company revenues and salaries and positions, was not merely a matter of COVID overhiring or the advent of AI. It was actually the tools we were using, the way we were using them, and the methodologies we were using to build them. So my first thought was, well, if I could be more powerful with better tools, and more importantly, if I could explain to the people around me and explain to the people above me with a cleaner methodology that had tools based on the work we were actually doing instead of the work that they thought we were going to be doing, 20, 30 years ago, how many of the pain points of my career would be solved if I could explain things more visually, less industry buzzwordy? I've known a number of situations where two engineers get to talking on the same project in the same code base, and eventually they say, show me the pull request, because software is not a spoken language. And so even engineer to engineer, there is a monumentous amount of confusion. So the Seneca system is a collection of small components that are all at the understanding level of a beginning computer science graduate. And that's used to build an entire web stack with all the features, including a replacement for a database, network socket handling, templating, everything you would need to build a really amazing website. And the amazing thing is, every single component makes sense and is explainable, and so you have the ability to just dump the memory out and hopefully have conversations that make sense. Now, the challenge is that because a number of the people I talk to who are the most supportive of this idea are actually users of software, not engineers. I have a very hard time finding engineers that are willing to admit what I believe is the truth, which is that the tooling sucks. And I don't know exactly why this is. I don't know why it is that I've met and seen a number of engineers speak online about the horrors of big tech, only to favorably name some feature or research project from their favorite big tech company, as if they can't see the irony that there is an egotistical problem in software that thinks it is somehow different than other things. But because I'm so far outside of software and unable to really get people on board, it's time for Compare Basic to become a part-time occupation. I'll talk about all the amazing things we hope to build next year when the music starts. So my vision for what software could have been comes down to a few simple things. The main thing is that I don't think any user experience will ever become better than a pen and paper. I think that's the gold standard. I think that's the model. I've I've heard so many stories of people who print out their go to go to an interview, and the interviewer has printed out their resume and is marking it up with a pen. And to me, that means that whatever note-taking, cataloging, hiring system they have, there are mental leaps the user has to take to catalog the information. That means that just grabbing a pen and jotting down notes as the person talks uh, is appealing. And when I go to people's houses, I notice they have everyone has decorated them completely differently. Even people who wear the same clothes at times wear them a little differently. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that what people have a very close relationship with and something they use quite a lot is something that they arrange for their needs. And if I were to develop a phone, which I have planned a lot of the inner workings of and very much look forward to working on that hopefully someday, I would actually model it more like the ticket system of a restaurant than what I see now. And the reason is restaurant ticket systems are designed for speed. And with all the discussion about the exhaustion of using phones, I wonder if it's because the overload of detail in the icons makes it look more like a spaceship than a functional tool. And I'll give you one quick example and then kind of more of a abstract, dream of a phone interface. But the quick example is I have two settings of noise level on my phone. I want it to ring or I want it to vibrate. Uh, there's no situation where I want it not to make noise. However, because I don't have the ability to remove that no nothing, no vibrate, no ring option, I have to click through it to get to the other two at any given time. 3 is a confusing enough number. And at times I accidentally end up on the no ring, no vibrate, and then I miss things. And what's amazing to me is that I don't have the option to choose, hey, these are the things I use, these are the things I don't. And it's entirely possible for my phone to suggest to me, by the way, you've never set it intentionally on no sound. Would you like to have that? And so what I envision going back to the restaurant ticketing system is how much more comforting it would be if my phone was like just divided in 4 sections. Was like, you commonly do these 4 things, click one. And that comfort to me would be so great because I think that when we talk about things like doom scrolling, is it the doom of the news, which lately has been pretty nasty, or is it the scrolling? I thought at one point when I was designing marketing strategies that it would be hilarious to have a feature of the invention of the printing press some several hundred odd years ago, and have the inventor of the printing press be informed that several hundred years later people were going to go back to scrolls. They were, yeah, this whole thing of flipping a page because it's a cognitively understandable unit and you get to see where you were and where you're going. Yeah, no, they're going back to scrolls. They put all their genius of computing power and decided that there's no reason to make people feel anything other than motion sickness. And when I think about what happens in my brain as I scroll and then have to verify the scroll has happened, because I believe that my mind is tracking the motion of the page as it were track a baseball flying towards me, or a frisbee that I'm expected to catch. I think it's that same part of my mind. And there was an emergence of what was called, there's 2 terms for this. Adaptive is one, and then I'm adaptive and re something. What it essentially means is it's a page that changes the content based on the size of the screen. So you have one group of styling for a desktop monitor full size and one group of styling for a phone. And as I went to design these interfaces in CSS and JavaScript where necessary, what I realized was that the calculations of what fits on a page is so simplistic for a computer to do that we absolutely could live in a world where more interfaces have a next button than a scroll bar. And I believe that would be comforting. And at the same time, saying this is like, it's so the core of so many things to question infinite scroll. And this is kind of what I'm finding as I'm trying to promote the Compare Basic project, is that there is a lot of agreement on what is bad. There is very little agreement of how deep to go to wipe away the crud. And I think that like a next page flipping interface would be a big part of that. And then I was also thinking about email itself is, it comes in a big list, hard to sort and things like that. And oftentimes when there are big lists, I've noticed a tendency for people to want to add filtering of those lists. And I think there's a much more fundamental problem, which is lists are just not the way human brains work. I have a podcast application that puts everything in squares, like little like square pills, and then it pulls in the updates. It queries the servers with the RSS feeds, and it puts a little number of what's new, and it rearranges them in the order of what's the most new. And what I would love to see for email is to have buckets like that, one for people I keep in touch with quite often, one for new stuff, and then I can have like a bird's eye view quickly of what's come into what buckets. And the closest to this I've ever seen was a priority inbox auto magic, we figure it out for you. I believe it was from Gmail at the time, but don't quote me on that. And I remember thinking that this is one of the most arrogant products I have ever seen, because it is assuming that algorithmic auto magic is more valuable than choice. It is assuming that the magic of the system choosing what is high and low priority for you is what people really want. And there's a level of this that makes sense from a tech company, because that's the kind of thing that's really hard to write and really impressive when you get it correctly. What's actually incredibly easy to write is to take the email addresses that people have never responded to, thereby they are new. Very simple calculation. Take the emails that people respond to more than half the time versus about a quarter of the time. Very easy calculation. And the emails that people respond to absolutely all the time and within a quick frequency, meaning there's a very short time between when they receive the email they responded. These buckets are so easy to make, and you're going to need like 5 to 10 to 12 of them, and that's probably too busy for most minimalist corporate designs to stomach. But that would so easily allow me to sort my inbox, and it does not require a lot of bragging rights from the software people who wrote it, because it's not that complicated. But it's an example of giving something to users that they can make sense of, rather than pretending that you make sense of their life for them. And one of the things that I have noticed a lot in modern, highly creative applications is the use of bubbles. You may have seen this before only if you use 3D graphics renderers, audio applications, or game development studios. And the reason for that is that some of the calculative challenges in these spaces are so complex that you can't really flatten them into very much of a two-dimensional anything. I'll give you an idea of how this works. So most spreadsheets are fundamentally tabular and two-dimensional. You have some list of items that start on the left side and then categories across the top. And the spreadsheets will link in very complicated ways, because accounting models can get really elaborate. Well, when you're in the context of a software renderer and you're creating a pipeline that will calculate the direction of the light that hits a particular, not even a pixel, it's like the in-between calculation of a vector of various cross products of a wire mesh that is subsurfaced, so it's technically curved. So there's no way for a human to really understand how to make a 3D model look the way it is, unless you can take lots and lots of dimensions and map them out in inputs and bubbles and things like that. If you've ever seen these, they look like a very similar plot to what a cop show would do, by putting a photo up and strings next to it, or Or maybe this is, a show that has someone who's quite literally losing their mind. And when I think about the fact that every high-end audio engineering application I know of is doing this, they're mapping every numerically complex or procedurally complex problem this way. Every game studio I know is doing this. Every 3D graphics store is doing this. I actually believe this is the future of accounting and financial and statistical software. And I would love to be the company that breaks this into the accounting world. It's going to be full of ridicule and backlash and people saying we're, making them use robots. And there's going to be a whole bunch of hatred until people realize how absolutely amazing it is. And when I was doing mesh shaders for Blender just for fun in my spare time, what I found the most interesting was that it was very easy to modulate and control patterns with a variety of inputs. And it just made it kind of fun. And I think that it's the way our brains work. And I think to the extent that software is the way our brains work, people enjoy using it. To the extent that it is foreign to how our brains work, they don't. And I still believe that icons and the way they are and the way files show up on a desktop or even the way links are displayed in a web page is somewhat of an artifact of the idea that early computing mapped the physical world. And I think that giving people the ability to choose things that makes them able to customize their phones, their computer, their website, kind of like it's their own home, is something that will bring a lot more satisfaction to software. And I believe somewhere along the way, I think this is one of the criticisms that I've heard leveled quite often at MySpace, which is that they let everybody design everything and everybody did a terrible job and it became really ugly. And while that is true, I don't think that is enough of a reason to give people a lot more options than they have today. And I think that I am excited about some of the ideas I've talked about here. As you heard earlier on the podcast, it looks like I don't quite have enough to hit the notes of crowdfunding or selling a product quite yet. And what that means is I will be supplementing what I'm working on with a day job for a little while. I feel at times like I'm a farmer. And I planted a bunch of crops in the Sneaka system that I am seeing perform beyond my wildest expectations in terms of power and consistency and simplicity and the features they unlock. But I feel like I'm the only one who can see that the seeds that I've planted have all of this potential, and I expect such a great yield next season. And I'm so excited, and I'm pulling little samples out of the root out of the ground and looking at the root structure, and oh yeah, they're really taking root. And I'm checking the molecular consistency of the soil, and I'm getting all excited. And I bring people out to my imaginary farm, and I say, "Wow, look at how amazing this is!" And I tell stories about all this stuff. And sometimes the the response I get is people look at me as if I've shown them a big field of dirt, like just black topsoil, nothing coming out of the top. Maybe there's like one or two tiny buds, and I'm like, "Look, there's a bud coming up." And people look at me just like, "Dude, it's a patch of dirt. What are you talking about?" And to me, that's been hard for sure. But I also know that if other people have been told not to start over the way I have been told not to start over, and if other people have been told that the software engineer had to wind down for reasons completely unrelated to the software engineering world itself or the practices or the tools, I actually have an explanation for why it has been my observation that we are using things that have not been rebuilt nearly enough. And we are deepening conventions that are exhausting us. And it may just be because the ecosystem of investment and technology is reinforcing itself to its own detriment. But if you understand that that's the position I'm coming from, then it also makes sense that I need a lot of ammunition to pierce through the noise. I need some really cool features, and that is the reason why I have chosen to take a break again. I've done this before. I may do this again. And so Compare Basic, the Mondays on Tuesdays podcast will continue every week. It's been wonderful to put this down, but expect a lot of features from Compare Basic sometime in 2026. And I will see you next week.